Hey everyone, and welcome to Why Does Trump Want Markets to Crash? I'm really excited because today we have with us Sean, who's going to help us understand something that's like totally mind blowing. Why the United States might actually want its stock market to crash. Like, how crazy is that?
Thanks for having me, Sabrina. And you're right, it's absolutely wild when you think about it. I mean, who'd have thought we'd be sitting here talking about a country actually wanting its markets to tank, right?
Oh my gosh, exactly. And what makes this even more fascinating is that we're talking about the US, the world's biggest economy. Can you give our listeners a little peek into what we're diving into today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to break down this really interesting and and kind of bizarre strategy that's happening right now. We'll look at, the whole economic chess game that's playing out, the reasons behind it, and honestly, what this could mean for everyone's money. It's quite a story.
I can't wait to get into all of this. Like my mind is already spinning with questions. So, Sean, um, let's start with something that's really interesting. You know how Trump was always like super proud of the stock market when he was president?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, during his presidential campaign, he was, constantly talking about how he was going to make the market soar. Like it was one of his biggest promises, right? He'd tweet about it all the time.
But something really different is happening now, isn't it?
Yeah. And it's actually quite shocking when you look at the numbers. Like just in the last month alone, we've seen this massive drop in US stock indices, right? We're talking about an 8% plunge, which is, you know, it's huge. And get this, it's wiped out something like $4 trillion in market value,
Wait, $4 trillion? That's absolutely incredible.
right? It's just, it's mind-boggling when you think about it. And what makes this whole situation so fascinating is that it seems to be, happening by design. Like this isn't just some random market correction or panic selling. There's actually a method to this madness.
Oh my gosh. So you're saying this might actually be intentional?
Exactly. And and that's what makes this whole situation so incredibly interesting because normally you'd expect any administration to be totally freaking out about a market crash like this. But what we're seeing is something completely different. It's like they're actually letting it happen.
So, there are actually two theories about what's happening here, right? Can you tell us about the first one?
Yeah. So the first theory is it's actually really fascinating. It's all about what Trump calls the globalists. And and it's kind of like this whole orchestrated drama, if you will.
The globalists, that's who exactly are they?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's kind of mysterious because nobody really knows for sure. But, and this is really interesting, Trump's probably talking about these foreign investors who hold just massive amounts of US Treasury bonds.
Oh, like China, right?
Exactly. Like, let me break this down because it's really fascinating how it works. So, the US buys way more stuff from China than China buys from us, right? And and this creates what we call a trade deficit.
And what happens with all those extra dollars that China gets?
Right, so here's where it gets really interesting. China ends up with all these extra US dollars, and what they do is they kind of they recycle them back into US banks by buying treasury bonds. It's like, they're basically lending money back to America for these safe returns.
Wow, that's really clever, actually.
Yeah, but here's the thing. If Trump goes ahead and shrinks this trade deficit, right, China's going to end up with fewer dollars to invest in US banks. And and when there's less money flowing into banks, their profits take a hit. And, we could potentially be looking at another banking crisis.
Oh my gosh. So is that why investors are selling their stocks?
Exactly. They're like, they're picking up on this risk, right? And they're thinking, let me get out before things get worse. It's like It's like they can see the dominoes starting to fall. You know what I mean?
So, what about this second theory I've been hearing about? It's kind of wild because it suggests the Trump administration actually wants the market to fall. That can't be right, can it?
Oh, you're going to love this because you know what? That's exactly what's happening. And and it's actually quite brilliant when you think about it. Like this is where things get really interesting.
But that seems counterintuitive. I mean, don't presidents usually want the stock market to go up?
Right. Right. You'd think that. But here's the thing. Under Biden's administration, right, the economic policies have really only been helping like the top 10% of Americans. You know, the ones who can actually drive all that spending and consumption.
Oh, so what about everyone else?
That's exactly the point. The bottom 50%, they're still struggling, right? And Trump's team is looking at this and thinking, we need to completely flip this whole thing on its head. They want to shift from this consumer-driven economy to what we call a supply-side economy.
What does that actually mean in practice?
So think about it this way. For decades, right, American consumer spending has been like the engine of the economy. But this has led to some serious problems, you know? We're talking massive debt, these dangerous economic bubbles, and inflation that just keeps climbing.
That sounds pretty serious.
Oh, it absolutely is. Like, let me throw some numbers at you. The US debt right now is sitting at, get this, $34 trillion. And about $7 trillion of that needs refinancing soon at these really high interest rates. It's like trying to refinance your house at the absolute worst possible time, but we're talking about trillions here,
Oh my gosh, those numbers are just mind-boggling.
right? And that's exactly why Trump might actually prefer seeing the stock market fall right now. It's all part of this bigger plan to kind of reset everything. You know what I mean?
So, how exactly are they planning to make all this happen?
Oh man, it's like they're pulling all these different levers at once, right? And one of the biggest ones is tariffs. Like you'd think tariffs would actually drive up inflation, right? Because, you know, they make imports more expensive.
That makes sense.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Trump's been like super unpredictable with these tariff policies, right? And what's happening is investors are getting so spooked that they're actually more worried about everything slowing down than about inflation. It's kind of genius, actually.
What do you mean by that?
Well, like when investors get nervous, right, they start dumping their stocks and buying bonds instead. And that's exactly what Trump wants. The more people buy bonds, the lower the interest rates go. It's actually working too. Like the 10-year Treasury yield has dropped from 4.8% in January to about 4.25% now.
Oh, but then there's also this whole thing about government spending cuts, right?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really intense. You know Scott Bessent, he actually put it pretty bluntly. He said we're addicted to government spending and we need to go through this like detox period.
What kind of cuts are we talking about?
Oh man, it's pretty dramatic. We're looking at slashing government jobs, cutting Medicare, reducing food assistance, shrinking housing aid, like all these programs that people really depend on. And on the flip side, they're pushing for lower corporate taxes and less regulation to get businesses to pick up the slack.
That sounds pretty drastic.
Oh, it totally is. They're calling it kitchen sinking. You know, like getting all the pain out of the way right now to build something stronger later. But here's the thing. It's a huge gamble, and they seem totally committed to it.
But there must be some serious risks with this approach, right? Like what happens if things don't go exactly as planned?
Oh, absolutely. Like this is the thing that's keeping a lot of people up at night, you know? And the biggest concern is that this whole strategy could push us into a full-blown recession. I mean, we're already seeing some pretty scary signs.
What kind of signs are we talking about?
Well, like the prediction market Kalshi, right? They're saying there's a 40% chance of a recession this year. That's huge. And Jamie Dimon from J.P. Morgan, he's been warning everyone that this whole America first thing is fine, but America alone, that's a whole different story.
How would this affect regular Americans, though?
That's actually the really concerning part, right? Like, think about it. When the stock market crashes, it's not just some numbers on a screen. It's people's retirement savings, their wealth, everything they've worked for. And here's the thing, restructuring an entire economy, that's not something that happens overnight.
How long could it take?
Oh man, we're talking years here. And you know what's really interesting? The CEO of Alcoa, William Oplinger, he pointed out that when they make decisions about aluminum production, they're thinking 20, 30, even 40 years ahead. But with these constantly changing tariffs, businesses are like, they're super hesitant to invest in the US.
Even the Federal Reserve seems worried.
Exactly. Jerome Powell, he's basically saying like, hey, why rush? The economy's fine. But Trump's not really known for his patience, right? He wants action, he wants disruption, and he wants it now. And that's what's making everyone so nervous about this whole thing.
So, where do you think this is all heading? Like, what should people be watching out for?
You know what? It's really interesting because like both sides of this argument are going to face the same reality, right? It's just that not everyone can see it yet. And when it all kicks in, one group is definitely going to be like absolutely furious about how things turn out.
Are there any specific signs we should be looking out for in the near future?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, the big thing to watch is like these interest rate shifts, right? And with this upcoming US monetary policy decision, man, everyone's going to be watching that super closely. Like that could really show us which way things are heading. You know what I mean?
Well, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thanks so much for breaking this down for us today on why does Trump want markets to crash?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. And remember everyone, when it comes to the markets, sometimes things have to get worse before they can get better. But that's just how these things work sometimes, right?